I'm honored to be interviewing Ray Culos. Why that's important to me is because in 1998, when I got my copy of Vancouver Society of Italians, it was a book that I picked up and didn't put down until it was over. It was finished. But it was the first time that I was able to identify quite profoundly with my Italian heritage, because I knew about the heritage of my parents, but didn't realize everything that the Italians had contributed from the moment they landed here in Vancouver. So Ray, thank you for doing this for me. You've been quite an influence in my life, as you know. We've talked about that.
Well, thank you, Mario. That's very thoughtful and kind.
And this is just one of 3 volumes that you've done on Vancouver Society of Italians.
That's correct. Then there's a couple of others, including the most recent one, I guess, is the Injustice Served.
Yeah.
And the Shoeshine Boys.
Well, I enjoyed the Shoeshine Boys. I got to read a little more. That was a fantastic book. But, you know, your book about Injustice Served, it's kind of apropos to the time where we've just received an apology from the Prime Minister.
Correct.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I welcomed an apology from Ottawa. However, in my judgment, they didn't go far enough in explaining why it was that they were offering this apology. For example, those interned during the war were not charged with a single misdemeanor or crime, and they were also not allowed or permitted to seek private counsel. Yes. They could not hire a lawyer. And I have the, you know, because I'm long in the hair now, you know, I do remember some aspects of the internment question, because my dad was extremely involved. And I don't think that the timing was perfect. I think they waited until everyone had passed away, except for one person, I think, a 102-year-old person from back east. Like many other subjects, the internment has 2 sides to it. The one that we received from Trudeau's government, an apology, and the other is that there were indeed fascists among them. And I know this because I've interviewed a few of the fascists. I think that I'm very pleased the way it has worked out, but I cannot but say, as an amateur historian, that had Mussolini and Hitler and Tojo won the war, some of these people that were interned may well have had to come up with some answers or let go, and they would be freed rather, and then they would have participated in the pre-war government, you know.
Yeah.
So, but that didn't happen, so it's irrelevant, I guess. But my take is that it was a wonderful thing to have done with that question.
Yeah, I you know, from my perspective, there was a lot of questions that had come to us. You were helpful in making sure we got the right people identified so that they could participate in this event in Ottawa. And I think from my perspective, there were the people that were interned who were taken away, you know, unceremoniously.
Yes,
and
indeed.
More importantly, there were the people who were interned, the adverse effect on their families, but also the terror that was in the community because you didn't know if you were next. And here are these people who are new to a country, trying to learn a culture, a language, trying to make a living, and you just weren't sure, like you said, detained for no apparent reason, no charges were laid, no access to counsel. So you didn't know if you were next.
True enough. I think that although there were 630 people interned, there were literally thousands who had to report to the RCMP, and members of my family also included, and it was degrading. If you thought yourself a good Canadian, and then required to sign in every month to divulge if there were any changes in your address. I had one uncle, for example, that had to be removed, not figuratively, not literally, and he, because the law of the day was that they didn't want an enemy alien living in the area, the lower mainland, where there's an airport and steamship docks and train stations. They weren't certain on June the 10th, 1940, what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So they took the precaution that perhaps, in retrospect, was rash, but in the day, it was probably a better thing to do than not. I don't mean without the benefit of counsel and so on, you know. But I don't think we can dispute the fact that if you were around in 1940 and France had fallen and Italy got into war and Britain was on its knees, that you wouldn't have been very conscious of the fact that if there were some Italians in Canada or in Britain even, that were suspect as enemy aliens. I mean, the definition of enemy alien is something that everybody should consider, and that is that if you came to this country during Mussolini's term in office, and that you chose not to take Canadian citizens, or at least apply for Canadian citizenship, you were an Italian citizen, a citizen of a belligerent country.
Yes.
So those are the arguments. But my writing and my sympathies go on the side of those who were interned, because most of them were not a danger to this country.
Yes.
But I don't think anyone would mind my mentioning Alice Pasqualini, whose husband was interned. She suffered a nervous breakdown. She would appear on our porch, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. Not often, but she did, seeking my dad's advice. Have you heard what's happening to Santo and that sort of thing? So when you live that part of it, it's a different story again.
Real,
it's very real. Yeah.
So, that was I'm glad you wrote about it, documented it the way you did. Of course, I have that book as well.
Good.
But I think one of the questions, so for me, the reason I wanted to have you on is to explain to this new generation of Italians, similar to what I did, is I picked up this book, I read it, and I've read the other 2 volumes, but for some reason this one really touched me in a very special way.
Yes.
That you start to really understand your heritage, your culture, and really your values as Italians, and the people who paved the way for the post-Second World War group of immigrants. Why did you do these books?
Well, initially, it's because my father was so active that, in the community, and my mother, that it was something I understood from a very young age, to be connected with the Italian community. On March the 4th, 1945, it was my brother's 10th birthday. I was 9, and he and I were initiated into the Sons of Italy, Figli d'Italia, Società Figli d'Italia. And so at a very young age, then, although I didn't understand it fully, I was part of the Italian community. And because my parents were so active, I couldn't help but be part of the Culos family that was known by
Everybody.
Just about everybody.
That's right.
My dad had written the first, and it was a short history, but the first history of the Italian societies,
Yes.
1935, and he gained popularity in that because he was an educated person, whereas most immigrants of the day were not.
Yes.
My dad was an accredited public accountant, but during the 30s, I think everyone who is listening to this might want to remember that when Mussolini invaded Abyssinia, or Ethiopia, if you like, that the League of Nations virtually collapsed as a result of their inability to deal with Mussolini. And so Italians were not very popular among the Western nations. So unfortunately, they led their own demise, or at least they contributed to their own demise by choosing Hitler instead of the Western allies. So,
Yeah.
but people from Italy who came here, like my dad was here in 1910, his father in 1907, my maternal grandparents 1910. They were people looking for an opportunity to gain a presence within their own community, which meant a good job, sending their children to school and so that they might get a better education than they, and they achieved this. They did. I mean, I think that the world will have to admit that wherever Italians are in this world, outside of Italy, they were by and large good citizens. They had the white picket fence, they had the garden, they had the church, and generally speaking, saw to it that their children had an opportunity to go to school. You can't beat that for a world citizen, in my judgment. And so a lot of things happened to them, not as a direct result of their own actions, but rather a government's actions.
But, I think that is the story. Whether you came in 1910, post-World War, it was always about creating a better opportunity for your children. Mm-hmm. And it ties back to the Italian tie to family and bettering oneself. And I think you speak quite often of people who have been able to accomplish this, and the reams of Italians that find themselves in professional careers within the political arena of the country in a way to use that heritage and value that they were brought up with to better the country. Absolutely,
yes. And I think it's going on to this day.
Yes.
And that's why this institution is so important. I should imagine the last couple of years have been extremely difficult because the continuation of programs were limited as a result of this pandemic. But history teaches us to observe and go forward. And I would say that we had this experience with some people having to report monthly. My dad was one of them. As I say, one uncle went to wood fiber, another went to Hope, because they were not allowed to live in the Vancouver city. So that would really make you feel neither fish nor fowl. Like, who am I, and
what am I doing?
And what am I doing here? Yeah, I'm not certain if that was the direction you wanted to go, Mario, on this interview. But if not, just tell me, and I'll.
No, I think it's important that, again, I think it's very important for the younger viewers that watch this, those that are of Italian Canadian descent, who haven't really attached themselves or fully appreciated the value of our culture and our history within the Lower Mainland and what we've accomplished within the country. So, while I was busy doing other things, it wasn't until I went through that, your first book, that you really appreciate the level of organization and the influence of these Italian immigrants who came from a different country, a different culture, a different language, and how much they were able to influence their community.
Yes, and their assignment was something that they would never have had experience. They would never have had to experience if they stayed in Italy.
That's right.
And I'll explain that briefly. My dad was born in the north of Italy, Friulano.
Yeah.
My mother's people are all Abruzzese, and they would never have met.
That's right.
In a lifetime if they had stayed in Italy. And so our community here is representative of the various strengths that Italy has in the way of its population. But it wasn't easy either, very clannish people. And before Mussolini came into government, the Italian language wasn't the language of Italy in its schools. They had to develop that because, like, my mother grew up speaking Abruzzese, my dad Friulano, and so where would you have had? I hope this is not a bad joke. I grew up saying to a number of people who would ask, I said, well, I'm from a mixed marriage. That's Abruzzese and a Friulano. But that's why we have several, accounts for why we had several different organizations. Like the Famiglie Friulani, for example, wouldn't have other than Friulani in its group, so that heritage is good, and I applaud them for pursuing that. But this institution is extremely important because it invites all Italians.
That's right.
To come and share their history with others and to benefit by what they learn from others. Mario, I'd like to say, for the record, so to speak, that
speaking as a former journalist.
As a former journalist, I was at the newspaper at the time, and my dad, unfortunately, had a domestic accident. He fell from a ladder, broke his back, and was on the wheelchair for 20 years. And I would go and talk to him, and he had a wealth of knowledge and experience. So I was writing for the Italian newspaper, I think, of the day, and he would tell me the story, and I would write it, and then it would appear in the newspaper. And I think I did it because I wanted. I did. I successfully found a topic that he was extremely interested in, because he spent most of his life an advocate of the Italian community and its purpose, the community itself. So when I produced the book, it was about the time he did pass away, but I know that my effort is this. My effort was to recognize what my parents, among other people, but certainly among my family, my dad was one of the prime examples of a leader in the community. So having said that, and because my dad was an accountant, he had records, one of a kind, letters that were written and received in the 20s and 30s from the fascist government in Italy, and all the consuls, of course, were fascists, and or they wouldn't be serving in that capacity. So I have a wealth of information, and I've been doing my utmost to cooperate with the Italian Cultural Center. First of all, the staffing can be a problem. You can't devote one person to Ray Culos' stuff, but I have the original minutes of the Sons of Italy, the Constitution that was handwritten in 1905, items that are one of a kind that need a home. They need a home.
Yes.
And not in the closet.
No, I think this is one of the things that we've been working on, and of course with our curator Angela, who has been quite active with SFU, and the idea is to digitize and maintain all of the records that you have. Yes. And on behalf of the Italian community, and we're going to continue to work together, especially now that we're easing out of the pandemic.
Sure.
What you've created for us as Italians in the Lower Mainland, and Italians everywhere, quite frankly, is the opportunity for us to look deeply into our history, to actually see the material that you have. And I'm very much in favor of the same thing you are. This is what we should be preserving here. And I really want to thank you for coming here today. And this is not the only show that we're going to do. We want to continue doing some of these shows that talk about our heritage, our culture as you see it, and actually show some of those artifacts that you have. I know that you've presented us with the materials from the internment camps that we're working with to try to have digitized. Those are all important components of our history in the Lower Mainland that the Italian Cultural Center needs to take care of for years and years for everybody to enjoy. So thank you.
Well, I wish to also thank you and the Italian Cultural Center. Angela has worked hard. I know it's hard unless you get the grants to get the work done. But most of us old guys take our knowledge with us when we leave, and not in this particular case, because you've already embraced, the center has embraced itself into this project, and so has Simon Fraser. And I don't know how we can achieve this, but it needs to be something similar to the Jewish community of Vancouver's. I think it's 41st and Oak, maybe somewhere.
And they're doing a redevelopment with an actual museum that focuses very specifically on the community.
And they have all this.
Yes.
That is to say, their history. Mine, I inherited from my father and added a little myself. And I like this idea of an interview because if it were necessary, I could speak on in detail on some of the artifacts that I guess we were talking about here. So I'm committed, but I am 85, so I only have about 15 years left,
We figure another 85. But we will do this again, and I think it's a very interesting component of our YouTube channel that we're launching, so that it can relate to the museum, but also our heritage, our history. And there's no better narrator and historian of the Italian culture in Vancouver. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to many more of these.
Thank you very much, Mario. It's a pleasure.